Hi, everybody. Um, Welcome to an exciting session. Welcome to the 2020 APAC Groundbreakers virtual tour by the APAC OUC. This year event would be the biggest one ever done, where you've got 174 sessions. Now, this includes normal sessions, workshop, hands-on labs, from over 123 different speakers in 11 days. Also, it will cover sessions in 4 different languages. Now, please remember to register for as many sessions as you can, and all these sessions will be available for replay. So for the next 2 weeks after the sessions, these sessions will be recorded and will be available for you to replay as many times as you like. Now, you can also interact with the speaker. So if you, during these 2 weeks, by posting questions or comments directly in the playback session page. So if you go to the page where the recordings will be, you can then still interact with the speaker. So you're welcome to post questions and talk with them through the topic. If you bear with me, let me just move to the next slide. Yep. I would like to say thank you to the Oracle user group and the Java user groups that made this event possible, and also to our sponsors. This is very important, just to thank our sponsors, the Oracle Groundbreakers and CloudDB. Now, for today's session, demystifying the use of wallets and SSL with your database by Ashwira Kala. Now, please feel free to write questions at any time during the session in the Q&A tab. Now, for those, most of you will be familiar with Zoom, but if you're not, just if you look on the Zoom tab or the tab bar, you will see that there's a Q&A option, and if you click on there, you can post questions. Now, what you can do is if you post questions there, when we get at the end of the session, the questions will be answered. So if you can, any questions you've got throughout, you can post it there, and if we have enough time, we'll go through all those questions at the end. Now, without delay, let's start this exciting session. If you just bear with us for a second, we're just quickly gonna just change the screen sharing. Perfect.
So, thank you so much, Anton. So good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. So it's morning from where I am. So I hope we have a fun time for the next 1 hour or 45 minutes. So I am Aishwarya, and well, you can call me Ash. I mean, that's what most of my colleagues and friends do. But today we'll be speaking about wallets, native encryption, and SSL, and how all these things work with an Oracle database. So this is something about me. From where am I? I'm based in India, in a city called Dehradun. And as you see, this is like, I got a really grainy picture, but this is all I could get. This is the best I could get, rather, where you can see that I'm from a part in India where it actually does get cold. You know, India is mostly associated with being so super hot, but yep, there are parts where you do have snow. So that's where I am right now. Okay, I work as a lead database consultant with Pythium, and we're an IT services company. This is something about my employer. And this is what we're here for. So these are a few things that we'll take a look at today. We'll begin with wallets, then we'll move on to encryption. Then we'll take a look at the database network encryption options, which is native network encryption, the data integrity algorithms, and then at the end, we've got the TLS and SSL. So without wasting time, let's jump. Wallets. So what are wallets? Oracle says it's a container that stores authentication and signing credentials. Okay, that sounds something that should be very precious to us. If that is the case, how do we protect this thing? So the wallets can be primarily of 2 types. One, a password protected wallet, where the name itself implies that your wallet is protected by a password. The other, there's something called an auto login wallet. Now you might wonder, why would you need an auto login wallet? Isn't the wallet supposed to be secure? Well, an auto login wallet does have a password, right? This does not mean an auto login password. An auto login wallet does not mean that it does not contain a password. It has a password. It is protected by a password. What it does implies is that in order to open a wallet, you do not need a password. Then wonder why or how does that work? Well, that works on file system permissions. Your auto login wallets are protected by file system permissions. Now, the auto login wallet itself can be of two types. One would be the simple auto login wallet, and the other would be an auto login local wallet. What would be the difference? The difference would be the local wallet that would be bound to a server that picks up the server name as well as the owner from your host, and it ensures that that particular wallet can only be used on the server on which it was created. Whereas for your auto login wallet, now that's a wallet that can be transferred across servers and it can be reused on multiple servers. Now, of course, when I'm talking about reusing it or opening it, you do need to have an associated database as well, right? In case it's a TDE wallet. But that's what your auto login wallet does. Now, why would you really want on an auto login wallet? That's because at times when we are automating everything, for example, you've got an ASM restart or you've got a rack or you've got any scripts that auto start your database, you don't want to be waiting, or you don't want to be in a situation where the script is waiting for you to provide a password in order to open up a database, right? So in these cases, you especially would want an auto login wallet where once your server reboots, your database automatically restarts if it's configured to do so. So this is a bit about wallets. So the question comes, do you really need a wallet? I mean, things were working fine when we were storing passwords in config files. We had this setup, we had a script, we had a config file in the script where we could store our password. Now, what could go wrong over here? Just in case if you're wondering, one thing we often do miss over here is this, that is the file system permissions. So if you look over here, the file system permission is read. Now, this means, or this implies that anybody who logs on to your server would be able to read this file. Why would that happen? That could happen because of something called UMask. You might have a UMask that allows sets a default permissions to these files. So you've got to be careful about this. Or it could be you've placed it on a server, or you've placed it in a directory that's a file system share, that's an NFS. And it could be a setup where you've got a backup script that's used, or you've got a set of script which are used globally across your organization. You keep those scripts on a shared NFS and which is mounted on every server when you build. Now, this is something that, I mean, I'm sure most of you have come across at some point or the other. And if that particular share is mounted on a server where it should not be, or where there's a bad actor present, then your passwords would be exposed in this case. So wallets do provide you a protection in such scenarios. Another thing it does do is it protects, and I mean, in another way, the other way in which it protects your sensitive passwords, it would be something like this. Now, have you ever reviewed your code when you're writing script? For example, you have a code that takes your backup, right? And it does something like this. Now, this could be potentially extremely dangerous. What you're doing is any user on your system is now able to grep or figure out your password, right? So if you want to avoid things like this, wallets could be a very good thing to do. Now, just suppose you mask your passwords. Like in the previous scenario, what we did was we just didn't mask our passwords in our code. What if you fix up your code? Well, you can still be able, I mean, if somebody really wants to, then they can still figure out your password from the environment variables. Now, again, if you've got somebody on your server who is able to do this, then we are probably in a more grave situation than this. But Still, it is possible. That's the point. Now, this is not related, but suppose instead of the rman command that I just executed, what I did was I used a SQL plus sys, my password, and then a connection to my database. What would then happen? Would my sys password also be exposed? Well, Oracle does provide kind of a protection in this case where it auto masks your sys passwords. But again, as we noticed earlier, that this wouldn't work for any other password. For sys, Oracle does provide an inbuilt protection, but for rest of the passwords, we've got to be careful ourselves. So let's take a look at how to create a wallet. This is some basic syntax that you'll find anywhere. You use the mkstore WRL, that's the path of your wallet, and the create option. Now your wallet will have a certain password complexity. This is because you need a strong password to protect your wallet. So this is how you'll create a wallet. Now, once you create a wallet, which is a pretty straightforward thing to do, what you'll notice that a few files are present or created in this wallet. Now, what are these files, or why do you have so many files? Now, if you notice, there are two types of files. One is the P12 file with the P12 extension, and the other is the one with the .sso extension. Now, what are these files? Why do you need two files, right? Wallet would contain just a password. Now, this is what indicates that you're using an auto login wallet. What do I mean by that? I mean, the P12 file, that's your PKCS or your public key cryptography standards file, which actually contains your password and your auto login. Now that file, like when you create a wallet, you get a copy of that file where passwords are again encrypted, right? And the file called .sso or single sign-on, that's your auto login file, which actually gives you the ability, or gives the wallet the ability to open up without a password. So if you notice a .sso file lying in your wallet, that would indicate that it's an auto login wallet. If not, then it's not an auto login wallet. So that's a really quick way to figure out if it's an auto login wallet or not. Now, anything else? Nope, I think we're good. So this is all that we have about auto login wallets. Okay. Now, what do these wallets contain? So one thing that your wallet does contain is a credential. How do you create that? This is something that you can use to create a credential. As you can see, create credential is the option that's passed. Then what you're using is an alias. Alias is how you're going to refer this credential, and then the credential itself, that's the username. And over here, you'll provide your passwords. You are going to manipulate the wallet. And in this case, you're going to provide the password of your wallet itself, as well as the password that you want to store in the wallet. Okay. Excuse me. Now, once you've created a credential, you can use the list credential option to view the contents. Now, how do you use this wallet, or how do you ensure that your database is using this? What you could do is there are a couple of parameters, that's wallet location as well as wallet override, and you can use these parameters in the SQLnet.ora. What do these do? This particular parameter, the wallet location, as the name implies, it gives you the location of your wallet. And what does wallet override do? This forces your connection to use a wallet, right? Now, in the earlier implementations, that's version 12.1 and probably 12.2, I'm not certain about that. There are a lot of bugs around wallets. Now, I've got a couple of links marked in the appendix section where you can go through a few really good blog posts that explain about these bugs and the shortcomings, rather, that you might run into. So there's one thing that I would like to say. When you're implementing this, it would be probably a good idea to use a custom SQLnet.ora. Now, this is only when you begin your implementation, right? So that way you can isolate the wallet to the script. Now, what it does is that it gives you the time to test out that nothing breaks. So for example, what could happen potentially is that if you don't use this and you update the SQLnet.ora that's being used by your client or your database server, you can run into a scenario where now every connection to the database or every connection by the client needs a wallet, right? So if you've got a script that uses something like SQL plus sysdba, it can run into a problem. Now, this is something, there's a bug associated with 12.1. So just to avoid those scenarios, you can probably use a custom SQLnet.ora. And then at a later point, once you've figured out those bugs, you can then move on, right? So this is about this. Now, is there any maintenance overhead associated with the wallets? Certainly there is. You've got to back up your wallet. These contain credentials. These contain your certificates at some point. So you've got to back them up. And how do you do that? You back them up like the way you back up any other files on your software. You just do a file system backup. Like that's something you do. You don't have a special utility to do this. You just use your OS utilities. Okay. Any other maintenance overhead? Yep, you've got to rotate your master keys. Now, this is not required, but this would certainly be a best practice. So rotate your master keys, ensure that your auto login wallet is regenerated, and it is when you're using Aura PKI to regenerate the wallet. Sorry, reset the password. So this would be regenerated. So you've got to ensure that. And you can then show your password in whatever password manager your organization is using, right? So if you notice, I was speaking about MKStore and then I switched to Aura PKI. So there are a few tools, quite a few tools, and this is just a short list of the various tools that are present, but these are the ones that you probably will use the most when working with just an Oracle database, right? So MKStore, GUI, you've got the Oracle Wallet Manager, which is the GUI way of doing things, and then you've got an Aura PKI. So why do we have this, or what is the difference between these tools, right? So you've got something, this is just an MKStore help. So what you see over here, or what you can notice, is that everything over here, all the options are about credentials. You've got create credential, delete credential, or the credential maps, or everything is about credential, right? If you do an Aura PKI, that's more exhaustive. You've got your top layer which, the top section that talks about, you can use your Aura PKI to deal with CRLs, your wallets, your certificates, your JavaSafe, your JC, blah, blah, blah. And then you can then in turn go and do an Aura PKI wallet help. That would give you another set of exhaustive options that you have. So let's take a look at what are the contents, like what I'm looking at the same wallet. What do I see when I use MKStore? I see the credentials that are stored in it. What do I see when I use Aura PKI against the same wallet? I see the certificates. I don't see the credentials. So depending on what you want to look at, you would probably want to choose your tool, right? Now, this is what we talked about. So Aura PKI gives you a lot more things to do than MKStore, and especially if you want to do something on the wallet itself, that's things like changing your password. Aura PKI is what you'd want to use. Okay, moving on. So before we talk about encryption, there are a few things that we can, just some really basic things like what is encryption, your data that is going in a plain text format from between your client and server, it's accessible. The encrypted data is not. It's a very simple thing. Now, here's one thing, that whenever your client initiates a connection to your database server, right? Or whenever your application connects to your database, it is going to set across a set of credentials, which would be the username and password, right? Now, those credentials, the database credentials that it is going to send across, they are, or rather the password is always masked. Now, this is by default, this happens. You do not need to have any encryption enabled for this, right? However, any subsequent communication, for example, the application passwords or any sensitive data that will then flow between your client and your server, that would never be encrypted unless you turn on the encryption. So the only thing that is encrypted by default would be the passwords, the database passwords that your client sends in order to initiate a connection. Okay. So how does encryption work? So encryption basically works on a key where you've got one key that locks your data and another key that unlocks or decrypts your data. So this is something that's called a session key. Now, the session key can be the same session key where you've got the same key that's on your client as well as your server. This is known as symmetric encryption. Or you can have a scenario where your client, where your key that encrypts and the key that decrypts are different. How would that work? Well, we've used this a lot. This is how your PEM formats work, right? You pass along your public key, the client will encrypt the data, and you get the data back, the encrypted data back, and then you use your private key to decrypt the data. So this is your public private key ecosystem. Now, a quick comparison. Why? I mean, asymmetric sounds pretty good, pretty safe. You never share your public key anywhere. So what is the problem? Why don't we just use a symmetric system? The problem is that compared to the symmetric ecosystem, this is slightly slower. Symmetric ecosystem or symmetric keys provide better performance for encryption, but they have an inherent risk, the risk of transferring your session key. Under no circumstances you want your session key to be exposed, because that will then defeat the purpose of encrypting it. Now, these are a few algorithms associated with both these types of encryptions, but we'll look more into these in a few slides. So this is now talking about your database network encryption. First thing, these are the options that are available. You've got your native network encryption. You've got a native or rather a network data integrity algorithms that are available. And then you've got your SSL TLS that can be set up. Now, a really important thing to note over here is enabling all these features do not require any additional licensing. They are no longer a part of advanced security option. They are all available for across all the licensed editions for all supported Oracle databases. So essentially, if you've got your licenses in place, you should be good to use these encryption algorithms. So let's take a look at how do these work. So a thing that is common across all the three options that you have is the way in which they're implemented, in the sense that these can be implemented either at the client side or the server side. Now, why would you want only at a client side? It could be that you have one client that is across a firewall or that's exposed to public, and you want that any communication with that from that particular client or set of clients from that domain to always be encrypted, right? And you don't want the servers or the clients that you're talking to within your network, you don't want any encrypted communication. You've got a firewall and you're confident about that. So in those scenarios, you could have an implementation where you just have one client and that is having an encrypted communication with your server. The other way to implement this would be from your server side, where you're encrypting all your communications across all your clients, right? So this is what all these options can be configured at the client side or the server side, or a combination of the two. So let's take a look at native network encryption. So for native network encryption, this is what we had talked about earlier, this session specific key or the session key. Now, how is this key generated? This key is generated based on an algorithm. So you can essentially break the process down into two parts. One is determining whenever a client communicates with a server, the first thing it will determine is whether the communication should be encrypted or not. And the second thing would be, if it is encrypted, which algorithm to use. Okay. So how do we determine whether the communication should be encrypted or not? It's based on this parameter. the parameter is encryption underscore server. Again, based on your implementation, it could be encryption server. If it's a client side, it could be encryption client. Okay. So this is something that's configured in your SQLnet.ora, and this parameter has 4 values. Let's take a quick look at these values. So the first thing is required. What required asks you to do is, required is essentially forcing encryption. It says that encryption is required in this communication. That is, all connections will be encrypted, or no unencrypted connections would be allowed. So this is equivalent of forcing encryption. Okay. The next option was requested. Now here, if, for example, you configure this on server side, the server is requesting connection. It's not forcing it. So what do you mean by request? It is initiating the connection. It is initiating the encryption. But if the client is not able to support encryption for any reason, the connection will still succeed. It won't fail. Okay? So in the earlier case, what we said, it is forcing the encryption. Now, what we're saying is, okay, you're not able to encrypt your data. That's okay. I will still allow you to connect to the database. Okay? Now, the third thing is an even more relaxed parameter that says accepted, which means that it's not going to initiate, it's not going to force you, or it's not going to request you to initiate an encrypted connection. However, if you take up the onus to initiate an encrypted connection, that is, if a client decides that it wants an encrypted connection, the server will allow it. And the last is rejected, which of course, as the name suggests, it just disables the encryption. Now, these 4 parameters, of course, rejected is the least secure, required would be the most secure. So you've got required, you've got requested, then you accept it or you reject it. Okay. Now, how do these work? These work like this. So you've got these parameters on your client side and as well as your server side. So let's take a look at the required first. So if your server says that encryption is required, and if your client is able to provide, I mean, it is able to provide encryption, which means it's required. This is a case where this is a combination where encryption, the client will allow encrypted communication, right? So in this case, where your server needs it or requires it, and your client as well as the client requires it, then your connection would be encrypted. Okay. Now again, if your server requires it and your client is in a mode is in the requested mode, then again your connection will be encrypted. This is the third place where your client accepts encrypted connection and your server requires it. Again, it will be encrypted. The connection will be encrypted. However, if your client rejects or disables encryption and your server enforces, right? This is the thing that enforces encryption. In that case, the connection will fail. The client won't be able to establish a connection with the server. Similar case where your client requires connection, but your server rejects it, the connection will not happen. Okay. Or will not happen. Or similarly, if you look at requested, you've got the table where essentially if the encryption is rejected, in that case your connections will never happen if the other side is trying to force it, and your connections will never be encrypted if the server side are set to rejected, accepted, or requested. Okay, so it's a combination of all these parameters where if it is required, if it is set to required, then your encryption would be enabled. If it is set to rejected, it will most certainly fail in this particular combination. If not, then these will govern whether your encryption is disabled or enabled. Now, the thing that's highlighted in yellow, right, that is the default option, where your client side is also accepting encrypted connections. Your server side is also your server side is also accepting encrypted connections. But since both of these sides are accepting, right, none of them actually initiate an encrypted communication, and thereby your communication is disabled, right? So this is how you can, based on the parameter values on your client as well as the server side, you can determine whether your encrypted connection would be enabled, disabled, or whether the connection would error out itself. Okay. So this is how you determine whether the connection would be, encrypted network connection would be established. Now, the second thing was a bit about choosing your algorithms. How do we do that? Now, this is based on another parameter called encryption types, again, based on your server and client. Now, these are the various algorithms that are available, the 128 bit keys, 192, 256, and this parameter provides a list of algorithms that you can use. Okay. Now, the thing over here is you again are using this parameter on the client as well as the server side. So whatever is the first key that both the server and client agree on, the first algorithm, using that algorithm, a session key would be generated. And that key would then be further used for your key negotiations. Okay. So this would be the way in which your entire system would work. Now, again, looking back at this table, there's one more thing to note. Let's say you are in a scenario where both the sides have this parameter set to required, okay, the client as well as the server. That's a great scenario to be in, where both the sides are okay with encrypting the communication. However, in this scenario, if the client and the server are not able to negotiate an algorithm, they are not able to conclude or come to a conclusion on a common algorithm to use. In that case, again, there will be an ORA 12650, which means the connection would not get established, right? So this means that you've got to have a client that's compatible with, that has algorithms that match the algorithms on your server side, or in other words, that is compatible with your server. So these are the two parameters that will govern how this works. Now, when you're enabling your network encryption, what would you prefer? Would you prefer to do a required or a requested? Well, the better way to do it would be first set it to requested. Why? The option 2 that is I'm talking about. Why? Because this gives you an option to actually look at your configuration, right? And if there are any clients lying around in your ecosystem that do not have a network or do not have compatible algorithms and are therefore not able to encrypt the data, in that case, you can identify those clients, upgrade those clients, and then once you can see, or once you've identified that all your connections are now encrypted, then you can force your connections. So when you're setting it up, or when you're migrating, or when you're just implementing this, the first way would be to use requested. Then you figure out all the clinks, and then you move over to the required setting. Okay. Now, the network data integrity algorithms, these are pretty much the same. This is something that creates a checksum to ensure that your data packets do not change. If there is a change in your data, these packets or this checksum is altered, right? So this particular network integrity also works in the same manner. You've got a crypto checksum parameter instead of the encryption parameter, and you've got the same 4 values. Again, you've got a bunch of algorithms that are associated with crypto checksum. Okay. And you've got the same way you choose those things. You've got the entire, the same table applies, where the client and the server will negotiate whether crypto checksumming should be enabled, and then they will negotiate the algorithm. So to summarize, both these parameters can be configured via SQLnet.ORA, right? This is a symmetric crypto system, and the keys would be valid for only a particular session. Now, another thing to note is both these things are mutually exclusive. That is, you can have only integrity algorithms in place, or you can have only encryption algorithms in place. How does it work? Well, I could show you a quick demo about that. I have this. Okay, so I'm connected to my server. I run this. This is a Beckwith connection. So I can see I can't see any encryption or any crypto checksumming algorithms as of now. Okay. So now let's establish a TCP connection. This is my SQLnet. This is the content of my SQLnet.ora, which is essentially nothing. It's an empty SQLnet.ora. There are no integrity or. So if I check my network service banner, I see nothing. So this is the important query, or this is the important view from where you can figure out whether your connection is encrypted or not. That would be your $V session connect info. And there is something called a network service banner, which you can use, right? And now what I've done is I've added these parameters to my SQLnet.ora. I've set this to required, I've set this to required. And now if I query the same view again, I can see the algorithms being used. Okay. Now, if you notice over here, I have not forced any algorithm. I've just let it choose whatever it was able to negotiate. Now, if I have a requirement where I just want to use an MD5 encryption algorithm, then I can do this. I can provide a list of algorithms to use, right? I reconnect, and now I can see this is the crypto checksumming algorithm, and AES 128 is what I'm using for encryption. So it's pretty straightforward and very simple to implement. So let me skip these slides. So this is the view, the $V session connect info, where you can get all this information from. So we just saw all these things in a demo. So I'll just skip this. So now let's talk about TLS or SSL. So about TLS, why do we need it? That's the first thing, because we just looked at encryption and network native algorithms, which were very simple to implement and pretty much do the job for us, right? So why would we need it? This is one reason why we might need it. How do we trust whether the client that's initiating a connection is really who they say they are? So how do we determine that? For that
may be beyond my ability.
That is how do we determine that, right? For that, we've got something called SSL. What does that mean? That means that SSL establishes authenticity to your connections. That is what SSL is going to provide you with. For example, there's a client that wants to connect to you. The client says, hey, can you confirm your identity? The database says, sure, this is a proof. The demo says, or the client says, sure, here, this is my identity. And finally, your database says, great, now we are authenticated. So there is the authenticity to this particular conversation. That is something that SSL provides. How does it do that? It provides a proof. And what's the proof? The proof is a certificate. A certificate that's authenticated by a CA. And the certificate is something that also contains your public key. Okay. So whenever a certificate is exchanged, right, you're also sending across your public key with it. How does that happen? There's something that's called an SSL handshake. Let's take a look at that. Now you've got a demo that wants to connect to your, or demo, or rather a client that wants to connect to your server. So the client will say, I want to connect to you, and these are the cipher suits that I want to use to encrypt this connection. Okay. It sends across this information to your database server. Now the database will respond, okay, this is my identity, and also along with that, I'm going to send you the possible ciphers that I will use, right? This information, the database will relay back to the client. Now, what does the client get? The client gets a certificate, which it will verify, and it also receives the public key for the database server. Now, it can use this public key to encrypt any communication or any information that it wants to relay back to the database. How does it do that? It takes its own certificate, which contains its own public key. It encrypts it using the key that it just received, and it sends that across to the database server. Now, the database server has the private key, and it will be able to decrypt this information, and hence it will be able to get the public key of the client. So you see, the keys have been the public keys have been exchanged, right? Now this was asymmetric encryption or asymmetric scenario where your public keys were used to encrypt the data and private keys were used at both client side and database side to decrypt this information. As we talked about, this is a bit slow, right? This is not the fastest option that you have to encrypt or decrypt. So what you can do, what the database server then does is it generates a session key based on the algorithm that they have negotiated, and then it secures this session key using the public key of the client, and then it sends across this information to the client, and the client can of course decrypt it using its own private key. And now we are at a state where we've got a symmetric key at both the client side as well as the database side, and these keys were exchanged securely using your certificates or your public key cryptography. Okay, so this is what your SSL handshake does. It essentially provides you with a mechanism, along with of course the authenticity or the certificates. It also provides you with a mechanism to securely transfer your session keys, symmetric session keys. So this is how your SSL handshake works. So how do we implement this? Again, this is something we noticed earlier. This is stored in your certificates are stored in your wallets. So you can take a look at this. Now this is an empty wallet. I don't see anything over here. Right? I don't see anything over here. So what do? I use this command. I add a domain name to my wallet. I can provide a lot of things, for example, the key size and the signing algorithm I want to sign my certificates with. So now once I run this command, you can see there's a requested certificate in my wallet now. What does this mean? This means that I've requested a certificate which needs to be signed. Now, in order to get it signed by a certificate authority, I need to send it, right? So I'm going to extract it from my wallet. This is how I do it. I'm going to extract it. There are a couple of commands. I get a CSR file, any form. This is this is a file that I'll receive, and then I can email this file to my certificate authority. One thing I can do is, or one thing that often happens is your certificate authority might ask you to check the signing algorithm that you've used with the certificate. What you could do is you could use an OpenSSL command, and you can use this particular, you can find the commands, and you'll just see the algorithm that was used to secure this certificate, or sign this certificate rather. Now, if you notice, I was using Aura PKI in the earlier slides, and then I switched to OpenSSL. Why did I do that? Well, I did that because there are a few bugs with Aura PKI where it is not able to generate certificate or a CSR with SHA-256 signing algorithm. So even if you're forcing an SHA-256, it will internally sign it with an MD5, and then your certificate authority will run into a problem with. Okay, moving on. Once you receive the signed certificates from your certificate authority, you will review both the interim as well as the root certificates. Okay, you'll separate those out, and then you're going to import it into your wallet. How to do that? See, so you've received a certificate. Let's say you've received a certificate called LabWork certificate blah 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 .cer. You can use this command and you can figure out. Yeah, so you can see all the certificate signing authority. I don't have the validity in this screenshot. It's probably in the next one. Oh yeah, it's here. So right. So here you can see the validity of your certificate, which means that your certificate will expire on December 31st, 2028, right? Now, this is kind of the file that you'll receive which will contain all your interim certificates, right? So you've got to break out these certificates into separate files using something like VI. This is something called a certificate chain, where your root is CA, as well as the authority or the organization that you went to or you approached to get your certificate signed. They send you all the certificates that are associated with their chain. Okay. they'll give you a certificate, a bunch of certificates. You separate those out, and then you use this particular command to add it to your wallet. So if you notice over here, I'm adding trusted certificate. These are your root or interim certificates. And then this is the user certificate. This is the certificate that is for your organization. For example, this is the certificate for my server, which is my LabWork1 server. And these are the certificate authority that I have. Okay. Now, again, how do I implement this? In order to implement, it's back to the drawing board with SQLnet.ora. You've got the wallet location parameter, which needs to be set on both the SQLnet as well as listener.ora. Why listener.ora? Because listener.ora needs, you want your listener to be aware about the incoming connections and validate your SSL. It needs to be aware where the wallet is lying, and we will need to configure a secure channel. How do we do that? We do that. Okay, this is another thing this is another thing. That is your SSL version. This is how you control your SSL version. And let me just skip this. Sorry. Okay. So I think I missed a slide. Right. How do I do that? I do that using TCPS. So this is the secure channel that we establish. Okay. So going back now. So once you've set your SQLnet wallet.location in your SQLnet.ora as well as your listener.ora, the next thing that you'll do is you'll choose your SSL version. Now, this is how you implement TLS 1.2, where you can set your SSL version parameter to 1.2 or any of these depending on what you need. Now, if you want TLS 1.2, you'll of course choose 1.2 parameters. Now, once you've determined the version to use, the next thing that you want to do is use the cipher suits. Cipher suits, again, they are associated with various versions, and depending on the versions you want to use, you can probably use the associated cipher suits. Now, this is like previous thing where you just list a bunch of ciphers, provide a bunch of ciphers that are listed in your parameter. That's all it is. Okay. Once you've done that, I was talking about a secure channel earlier, you can modify your listener to listen to a TCPS protocol on a particular port. Once you've modified your listeners, you can restart your listeners. Okay. So you've modified your listeners, you've restarted your listeners. And that's all you actually need. So once you've got your certificates back, you've got your SQLnet.ora set up. Once you've got your certificates back, you've got your SQLnet.ora certificates set up, you restart your listener, and you should be able to connect. Now, how do you verify that your connection is secure? You do that using something called, you can view that using your syscontext. That's a network protocol that's present on your database. So whenever you connect to your, whenever you establish a secure connection over the TCPS port, this is what you can check to figure out your protocol and verify that your SSL is being used or your TLS is being used. Now, this does not, of course, confirm the TLS version. How do we check that? You can check that using this OpenSSL. See, this gives you the TLS version that's being used along with the cipher suits that are in play. So this is going to give you all the information that you need about verifying your connectivity. Now, what are some other use cases that are associated? You can use this if you have a package that is sending out emails to authenticate with the mail server. You can use SSL and TLS to secure all communications back and forth with your OEM. You can secure your OMS, your target connections, communication with the agent, right? Now, this is something that last thing probably that I wanted to touch. One of the last things would be what happens when you're dealing with a client which talks to multiple servers, right? So one way to do it would probably be to use a SQLnet, like multiple SQLnet.oras and multiple wallets, right? So you've got multiple SQLnet.ora. Each SQLnet.ora has the wallet location, which is pointing to a separate wallet. Now, that would probably not be the neatest way. Instead, what you do is you can have a parameter called my wallet directory that's available with tnsnames.ora, and you can use this parameter to determine your wallet location, right? So use your TNS names.aura, use the security parameter my wallet directory, and provide the wallet directory over here itself in the TNS string. So this comes in pretty handy when you've got multiple wallets. And are there any overheads associated with this? There most certainly are. You have to be very careful about your certificate expiry. I mean, this can come to bite you. If your certificates expire, all connectivity to your database will stop, right? All the client connections will start failing after May 18th, 2021. This is what this certificate says. Now you can set up some sort of monitoring where you're monitoring this particular date, and you're well aware ahead in time that you need to renew your certificates. So this is something that you should be extremely careful about. For troubleshooting, what you do is you've got a couple of parameters, the tracing that you can set on your SQLnet.aura or your listener.aura, depending on where the problem is. And once you've enabled your tracing, you can then use TCP dump. How to use TCP dump? You identify the NIC that's associated with the IP of your TCPS port, right? You use TCP dump, you listen to anything that's coming on that particular NIC. And once you got all this information dumped in this trace file, you can use a tool like Wireshark. Now this is a Wireshark GUI output where you can see that the communication is happening in TLS1 version 1.2, and you can of course use this to troubleshoot or figure out anything else. So this is just an example of one of the tools that is available to help you troubleshoot. Now, this is what we've talked about for the past hour. We've talked about native encryption, we've talked about TLS. So as a conclusion or as a comparison, what you could say is native encryption was very simple to implement. You just had to enable your encryption server and provide a set of algorithms, and you were done. You did not have a real maintenance overhead. I mean, you don't have to replace your certificates or anything. But the problem over there was lack of trust or lack of authenticity, right? What TLS provides you is primarily your authenticity. Okay. So, but of course, the configuration is a bit trickier. There are a lot of steps involved. You've got to extract a certificate, send it to the CSR, get it, import it, and then you've got to do this over and over again every time the certificate expires, right? And there can be a possible performance overhead, because if you notice, this is a symmetric encryption that we're using, but not too much. But this is the most secure and it meets your industry standards. Can I use both of these together, the native as well as TLS? Prior to 19C, you could not. You'd get this particular error. But with 19C, you've got this parameter. And with this parameter, you can use both native network encryption as well as SSL together. So with this, I think I like to end. You can, I'm not going to go to the appendix, but you've got a few things over there where you could just go through, like what happens during an upgrade. What does ASM support SSL? No, it doesn't. ASM will always be on 1521. Or how does native encryption session keys, how do they, exchange the session keys in native encryption? So there's something about the Diffie-Hellman. So you can look these up later. I think I'll take a look at the questions now, if there are any. Okay. Multiple wallets per process for oracles. Not is some feature, but is it? But this isn't. Right. So multiple wallets process for oracles. Yep. That's, I'm not aware of CStack, but I think, yep, you're right. They most probably are not backported yet, are not available yet. When I'm talking about multiple wallets, I'm primarily talking about a situation where, for example, you've configured an OMS, right? You're on an Oracle, you're in an Oracle Enterprise Manager setup where you are, you want to connect to various targets which are encrypted. Everybody's got a separate certificate, and you want your OEM database to be able to talk with them in a secure manner. Now that could be a case where you need, one of the cases where you can need a multiple wallets. Or for example, there's a blog from Sean where he talks about wanting to connect to various ATP, ADB instances across regions. Those are some of the examples where you would have multiple wallets and you would end up using your tnsnames.ora. So with that, I don't think you've got any further questions, Anton.
Cool. Thank you so much. That was an awesome session with quite a lot of information in there. So I'm sure everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. Thank you so much, and thank you for the questions, everybody. And as mentioned before, there's still quite a lot of other sessions running. So please feel free to register for those sessions. And this session is being recorded, so it will be available. So for 2 weeks after the sessions, you will be able to review these sessions as well. I hope you have an awesome day. And again, thank you for joining us for this session, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much.